Hey, this is Lee Waller, and I am taking a look at motion media design using After Effects. To continue on, we're going to look at the 5 basic transform properties for each layer that you're going to bring into After Effects. I have listed here the 5 basic transform properties: anchor point, position, scale, rotation, and opacity. I'm going to start off looking at position. And position, you need to understand a little bit about resolution for your composition. I am working in a high-def composition, and it is 1920 by 1080. Starting right here in the upper left-hand corner is 0. And this composition is made up of pixels, and there will be 1,920 pixels going from left to right. And then going from top to bottom, there will be 1,080 pixels in that direction. Now, it's like a grid, so you could do the math, and 1,920 by 1,080, that's how many pixels are in this composition. Now, these two directions, our horizontal and our vertical, are X and Y axes. And you'll need to be familiar with those because those are going to show up constantly in our 5 basic transform properties. So X is going along left to right, right to left, and horizontally, and then Y is going vertically up and down, down and up. And that is registered by the number of pixels in this composition. So this object right here that I've animated, I'm going to take a look at its position. And under each of these layers, we have our 5 basic transform properties. You open up each layer by this arrow right here, click on it, open up, and then there is the transform properties. Those will be closed usually. Open those up and you see the 5 basic transform properties. You can see that I have animated position for this object, and we'll take a look at that. Position is made up of, like I just said, X 960, X position, and Y position 540. So what those two numbers mean is if I come up here on my X axis and move from 0 over to 960, and then move from 0 down to 540, that is where this object is located in the composition. So 960 by 540, that's where this object is located. And that's where I've set my first keyframe. I will go over keyframes later, but I want you to understand the 5 basic properties first. So I'm going to start this animation, and you'll notice that this object will begin to move around based on these keyframes and the different positions that I've recorded in the timeline. So there, the object is moving around, and the way I've built this object this animation is just to demonstrate how this object is moving in position on the X and Y axis. Next thing I want to take a look at is scale. Scale is fairly easy to understand. You can scale the object up or down. Scale does have an X and Y property. You can see here at the beginning I have a keyframe set, and the scale of this object is 100%. And then I move to the next keyframe, and it has scaled down to 25%. And then I continue on with the animation, and we have scaled back up to 100%. So let's take a look at these two numbers. Again, there's 100%. You can scale past 100%, but there can be some problems with that if it is a raster image like a bitmap, PNG, PSD. Those types of graphics, when they scale up, they're going to lose quality. This image right here is a vector image, and it will not lose quality as it scales up. But you can scale past 100%. You can scale the object down. You can hit 0, and then you can actually go into a negative number. That negative number will cause the image to flip. With this oval, you don't necessarily see that, but it will flip the image. I also want to demonstrate to you that these two, the X and Y percentages, are constrained together. So as I click and drag on one, the other one follows right along with it. Let's say that I want to animate the scale of just one of these. This chain link right here constrains these two numbers together. If I click that off, then I can manipulate these two separately. So you can see I can set the scale of this one separate from, this is the Y axis. I can set the y-axis scale separately from the x-axis. The keyframe has recorded that change, and so now when I play this animation, you can see that it takes on a totally different look from what we had just a moment ago. Now it'll scale back up, and then when it gets to the end and repeats, it's going to jump back to this right here. So the next property that I want to look at is rotation. This animation is rotating this object 360 degrees, and then the composition just repeats, and so it continues on in that cycle. Now, rotation has two properties that we need to understand. It's set up with 0x plus 0.0 degrees. And these two numbers have different functions. This animation here, I've told After Effects to rotate this object one full rotation. The way that I've done that is with the 0x number. So this first keyframe records 0x, and then when I go to the end of the composition, it is now a 1x. And so what I've told After Effects to do is during the entire span of this timeline, rotate that object one full time, and that's what it's doing. So if I wanted to tell After Effects to rotate this object twice in this animation, what I would do is come down here to my second keyframe, and rather than 1x, I would record 2 times. So the first one was 1 time full rotation. Now it's going to do 2 full rotations, so it's faster. Halfway through there, it is rotated once, and now at the end, it is rotated 2 full times. Again, to demonstrate this, if I wanted to rotate 3 full times, I'd come to the second keyframe, and where the 2x is, I would click on that, type in 3x, and now the rotation is going to be much faster, but in this entire time of the composition, it will rotate that object 3 full times. So that's the first number. It represents the number of full rotations you want the object to do. The second number has to do with the number of degrees and just animating within this 360 degree area. All of these numbers are within the 360 degrees, and you can see that the animation just keeps bouncing back and forth based on where I've told After Effects to go. I'll take a look at these real quickly. You can see here that this 0.0 degrees is first set at 0, right there, and as I scrub through, you'll notice that that number is changing, and is changing on the number of degrees that it's going to meet at this point in time with this keyframe, and that's 57 degrees. So I just went in and told After Effects to animate over to 57 degrees. Now it's going to come back, it's going to pass 0, and this is a little weird, but once it passes 0 and starts going into that negative number, it's not going to go to 270, it's actually going negative, and it's going to be around a negative 92. So keep that in mind. But again, this second number has to do with just animating within the 360 degree radius. The first number has to do with animating full rotations. The next property I want to look at is opacity. Opacity is the visibility of an object. You can also use the word transparency, but After Effects uses the word opacity. This animation is increasing and decreasing the opacity of this shape layer that is on top of the text layer opacity. It is increasing it and decreasing it based on the percentages that I've designated by these keyframes. So the first keyframe, opacity is at 100%, and we can fully see that shape layer. It is 100% opaque. We come to the second keyframe, and it is set at 0, and that shape layer has completely disappeared. We go to the next keyframe, and that is set at 50%, so we can halfway see, partially see. We can see through that shape layer. We can see a bit of the text, and we hold for that 50%, and then we move back to 100%. So that's opacity, just increasing and decreasing the visibility of the object. The last property I want to take a look at is the anchor point for each object. The anchor point is relative to the object. Anchor point sometimes can kind of be misunderstood as a position property, but what it has to do with is the anchor point of each object that you're working with. You can see these two objects here, and I've designated their anchor point with these crosshairs. Anchor point will affect, as you see, scale and rotation. So these two objects are scaling up and down and rotating the same amount, but because their anchor points are in different locations on the object itself, you see a difference in their scale and in their rotation. To kind of get a better look at this, I'm going to hide these two crosshairs and I'm going to select each object. After Effects demonstrates or shows you where the anchor point is for each object. You can see there that when I select this object, there's the anchor point for it. And when I select this object, there is the anchor point for it. Now, I set this anchor point to be different. Anytime you create an object in After Effects, it's going to try to set the anchor point in the center of that object. So this one was created this way, and that is where the anchor point originally was. And this one, I moved the anchor point. The way that you move the anchor point is, of course, with the anchor point property. So this layer is this object right here, this shape layer right here. You can see that I've moved the anchor point 100 pixels on the x-axis and a negative 72 pixels on the y-axis for this object. Again, these two numbers are relative to the object, not to the composition. So if I go to my other shape, you'll see that the anchor point is dead center of the object at 0, x, 0, y. And I can move that, but what it's going to do is it's going to make it look like it's moving the object. But what it is actually doing is just setting the anchor point at a different position on the object. And so now when I rotate both of these, you can see that they are rotating and scaling at that anchor point. So to recap very quickly, the 5 basic transform properties for any layer that you're going to have in After Effects will be anchor point, position, scale, rotation, and opacity. There are shortcut keys for each of these. Anchor point will be A, position will be P, scale will be S, rotation will be R, and opacity is a bit different. Opacity will be T. I hope you'll continue watching on as we get more in-depth with motion media design with After Effects.